My next guest is a New York Times best-selling author with 450 million books sold and counting. He's also one of the foremost masters of suspense writing today. He interviewed me recently about my book for kids of all ages, Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls. It's the first installment of my Will Wilder series, and what a pleasure to hand the floor over to Dean Koontz. He sat down with me at our EWTN studio in beautiful Orange County, California. Take a look. Dean, thanks so much for being here.
Well,
so take it away.
this is a great pleasure for me. You've interviewed me a number of times, and it's always appeared to be lovely. But you didn't know that I left the stage bitter.
So this is payback.
Now it's payback.
Thank you. I think, be kind, be gentle. I'm not used to sitting over here.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
As you know, I read Will Wilder some time ago.
You did indeed.
And gave you a little blurb for it because I liked it. It's the kind of book when I was a child I wished I could have had more of. So,
oh, thank you.
And but where did this series originate, and where did you get Will Wilder from?
Well, as you know, his name wasn't always Will Wilder. His first name came out, I often say, Will Wilder was born as a soap opera, because when I was bathing the children, they'd be in the bubbles up to their necks, and they'd demand stories, fresh stories. Tell us about something, give us a story. And just to keep them occupied, I came up with this impetuous 12-year-old kid and his kind of wacky, dysfunctional family members. And they loved the slapstick nature of it. Every now and then I wove in a little supernatural thing or something scary. And I saw their response to it. But originally, this character was named Kerman Durman, which I don't even want to say because it's so hard to pronounce. And I'll tell you later why it changed. But that's where the character came from. It was really something to entertain the children. I went back then and sort of deepened, as you know, we have to do this. You come up with a backstory. And I was an actor. You know, I was trained as an actor. There was a woman, Stella Adler, who I worked with for years. Stella was a legend in the theater, trained Marlon Brando and a lot of great people. Stella had this technique where when you approached a script, you as an actor would go and write the backstory. You wrote your own biography and what does this character want? What is its action in this scene? I built these characters the same way. I did a lot of background research, if you will. And as I wrote their backstory, the series basically presented itself. And I saw where the family came from. Will Wilder has a great-grandfather, Jacob Wilder, who pops up at the top of each of these books. He's kind of a collector of relics and an adventurer himself. And Will is following in his great-grandfather's footsteps in some ways. So that's where the series came from. I really wanted to entertain kids, and then it became something much more.
Well, I wish you a great deal of luck with this because I think the marketplace needs it.
Thank you.
How much of you is in Will?
Oh, boy. You know, I imagine, like you, we've never talked about this, but I'll ask you in a second. My feeling is, when I read it, I'm in all these characters. I play all the parts. I see bits of myself in all of them, from, you know, Will to the father to, you know, Aunt Lucille and even a rather ancient evil that pops up in the book, which I'm not going to tell you how I'm like that character, but there is a little bit of me in all of them. But I was an impetuous kid like Will. I would sort of get something into my mind and run at it. I think I'm still like that, but certainly when I was younger, I was really, I gave my poor parents a run for their money. So that little bit is absolutely like me. But the rest of the character, he's his own little person. They take on their own identities as you write them.
Yeah, they definitely do. And people often say to me, how can you write women characters so believably? And I always say, because there's a piece of me in them. And it always surprises me that people don't realize there's a piece of you in each character.
Yeah, but there is, and you don't. But I don't. It's almost as if I don't realize it until I go back, or as you've said before, your wife reads it, who knows you better than anybody, and Rebecca will tell me, "Oh, I see so and so in that character. Or, this is you, isn't it?" And, well, it's not me, but it's a piece of me, and she saw it where I didn't. And you do kind of come. One of the amazing things about this series, writing it, as you tell the story, it does reveal itself to you. And there are things in this book that, frankly, I didn't put there. They came out, they fell out in the telling. And people said, oh, I love how this, you know, you really, the nature of good and evil, and this is what I got from the book. Well, I didn't intend any of those things. I just wanted to tell an entertaining tale that my children would enjoy and families would enjoy. But I now realize that it's much more than that.
Yeah, that's what happens to you when
Yeah.
you touch your creativity. I think I said to you recently, you find yourself in touch with a higher creativity.
Yeah.
And I think that's where these things come from. What research did you do for this? Because it's a research-heavy book, I think.
Yeah, there was a lot of research for the book. I mean, in some ways, I feel I've spent my whole life researching this book because of the acting background. That helped me get close emotionally to these characters. But then I had the challenge of the relics, and we have, at the center of Perilous Falls, at the center of the town, is this museum of antiquities, historical relics that Will has access to, a 12-year-old kid. And the story is basically, he is involved in an accident, he injures his brother, and Will is punished. And as a way to get out of the punishment, when he realizes his great-grandfather has not only secured this relic that supposedly has the powers to hold back the floodwaters of the town, but healing properties, Will thinks, okay, I don't really believe this, but if I can borrow that relic, heal my brother, I'll get out of my punishment and everything will be fine. Then I'll bring the relic back. Easy peasy. It doesn't quite turn out like that for Will. But once I committed to that trajectory, I had to figure out what relics exist, which do I want to use in the story and in the future of the series. Mm-hmm. And as you know, from writing Odd Thomas and your other series, that first book is critical because you're really laying the foundation for everything that follows. So I spent a lot of time figuring out which relics I was going to use. A lot of what's here, the opening scene in the book, Will Wilder's grandfather secures a relic in Ortona, Italy, in the 1940s during the war. That scene actually happened. Ah. The cathedral was demolished, the Nazis blew it up, and some of the other facts are accurate. Now, Jacob Wilder didn't run into the ruins, but in my book he does. So I did a lot of historical research on the relics, and the rest of it kind of fell into place imaginatively.
Yeah, one thing you've done, really, I'm sure you recognize it in this first book, is you've left it be open enough. In a series, you can make the mistake of closing yourself down and not realizing you're doing it.
Oh,
but
no.
You've got a world here that can keep opening up.
Well, that was the hard part, creating the world of Perilous Falls that Will would live in. I wanted an imaginative world that kids could feel at home in, but that had possibilities of adventure and little dark shadows. What I discovered talking to librarians, homeschoolers, teachers, boys particularly are reluctant readers. Mm-hmm. And they love not only adventure, but they like to be scared. So I walk right up to the line, and I was inspired by a few other writers here and there, including the guy at the table with me. So it was, you know, that, in your books, I've always marveled at, you plant, your intention isn't to scare, your intention is to walk us into places that perhaps we've never explored before. Mm-hmm. And we're scared in the process, but you never cross, it's not gory, it's not gratuitous. No. But it is evocative and suspenseful, and it's a real gift. I mean, yours, not mine.
How difficult was it for you with your career in TV to find the time to do this?
Well, look, I always tell people, if I could pick one person I could have the daily schedule of, it would be Dean Koontz, because one of the things I love about your work, and you see it, you hear it when you read your works, they read fleetly. You're lost in the imaginative world because the writer was lost in that imaginative world first. And it takes a lot of time just to immerse yourself there. So my wife, thank God, was so indulgent and is all the time. She took over basketball practices and brought my dinners downstairs, which allowed me 4 or 5 hour stretches in the evening. You know, some people golf, some people watch TV. I talk to my imaginary friends at the keyboard. That's how it happens, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed the trip. It's easier for me now to go back to Perilous Falls. Earlier on, it was harder because you were creating the walls, the trees, the blocks. Where is this? How does this fit in?
Once you've seen it in your mind, you can revisit it.
Right, but it's hard when you're building it, as you know. I wish you'd warned me, Dean. I would have had somebody else write this series.
Let everybody suffer with the first
Oh, thanks. The bleeding. You see the blood on every page. Hopefully it's not apparent.
Why did you want to write middle grade?
You know, people have asked me that. You've written so much for adults. Why do you want to write for kids. But I like that L. Frank Baum line, the author of The Wizard of Oz. He often said, I write for the young and the young at heart. And that's really who I'm writing for. I mean, there are things you can do in children's fiction because they're still open. There's still a sense of awe and wonder that they have. They'll go further down that path with you more quickly than an adult will. And I think the reason half of the readers of Kids Lit, which I didn't know, 50% are people 18 and older. Because I think we're all thirsting for that adventure, that sense of awe and wonder and the spectacular, the miraculous. And that's all in this story. And I wanted people to take that journey. And as you and I have talked about before, books have healing properties. Books, I think particularly when you're in that beautiful age between 5 and 13 or 14, you're still being formed. You're on the precipice of adulthood, yet you still have the eyes of a child. And that's a great time to capture an audience, and you have their attention. It leaves a deeper mark, I think, when you read as a young person. And I wanted to be at that table. I wanted to invite people to that table.
I've always been a reader of young adult fiction.
Really?
As long as I can remember, from when I was a young adult to now.
Really?
And so I think you're right about that. The readership spans, and it's a good way to go.
It does.
How is this series different from other middle grade series?
That's a good question. It is different in this sense. Ms. Rowling had her witchcraft and wizardry was kind of the central axis of her series. Rick Riordan has the Percy Jackson series, and Greek gods and Greek mythology is the centerpiece of that. Mine, it's sacred antiquities, historical relics. That is the centrifuge that sort of drives this story and the spine of all of these books. I wanted to also tell a story that had an intact family. And you know how hard that is. Yeah. It's much easier to write about a single protagonist alone, abandoned, orphaned, searching for his parents. It's much harder to tell a family saga. But I felt called to do it. It kind of fell out in the writing. And the family enriched this story in so many ways. The great Aunt Lucille, his great-grandfather. And I always tell people, the scope of the story is sort of Percy Jackson meets Indiana Jones in The Exorcist. That's sort of what this story is. And, but I hope it becomes also, and I've seen it in the early letters we've gotten from early readers, it's a conversation piece for kids, for their parents, and it really is about how we as people rely on the choices of the past, the choices made by our parents and our grandparents, and how, for good or ill, that shapes our destiny and our future. And we can't ignore that. We can change it. We have the ability to change it, but we don't have the right to ignore it.
Yes.
And if you do, you run into awful problems. And Will straddles that middle place. He wants to go in his own way, but he comes in contact with his great-grandfather's legacy and how he fits into this prophecy that he uncorks quite by accident.
Well, you've done all that very well, and
Thank you.
The relics featured in it, how did you choose them?
Oh boy. The relics in this book, I wanted one to be, have real mystical power. They both have supernatural powers. But the first one was the finger bone of St. Thomas. And you're familiar with an odd Thomas. And there actually is the finger bone of St. Thomas in a church in Rome. You can find it in the Church of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem. So I wanted relics and antiquities, and throughout the book they're scattered, that you can actually see in museums, in churches, because it's important for us to reclaim these touchstones, understand why these were venerated, what they mean today to us. Because I think they aren't only part of a Christian heritage, they're part of a Western culture. And I think literacy demands that understanding, historical literacy. And so it's that's why I chose those two relics. The second relic is the relic of the mantle of Elijah from the Old Testament. Now, the mantle has been lost to time, but in my book, it's in the museum in Perilous Falls.
And we know from the name of the town, it's going to have a lot of dark adventure.
Yeah, well, you don't want to spend too much time in Perilous Falls, but there's a sunny side. when he's not unleashing horrible things on the populace.
And Will has a supernatural gift. He
does.
sees demons that others find invisible. Tell us about where did that come from?
Well, I wanted Will to have a supernatural gift, and I liked the idea of a child who saw what nobody else could see, and how that gift, which he initially is running from. Since the time he was 5, he's been seeing these little shadows. But as he ages, the shadows hold, and when he turns to look at them, they actually have form, and they're becoming clearer to him. And in the book, they become all too clear, and he can even interact with them. What we find out, and I don't want to ruin it for everybody, but this gift is part of a prophecy, and many people have been waiting a long time for Will to come along. And it really, again, this is one of those things that I never intended, but I discovered in the writing. The gifts we're given are not ours to keep to ourselves, but we have an obligation to perfect them, to nurture them, and to share them with others. And Will learns that lesson in the course of this story. And there are all kinds of, I mean, other people have written me about the allegories they saw in his sight, but some of that, you know, I think is just part of the story and not necessarily something I put in there. So I always think, and I'm sure you agree with this, we do 50% of the job by committing the story to paper. The other 50% happens in the reader's mind, in their heart, in their soul. And it's been interesting to see the reaction of people to the work. And it's often not the reaction you had to it, right?
You sometimes, you mentioned earlier about children at that age being able to fall away in their imagination quicker into a story. One of the things that frustrates me most is I will get letters from readers who will take a book like Ashley Bell, my recent one, and there was something to say, I just couldn't possibly believe that. And I would say, but you see, that's why starting with the audience you're starting with is so satisfying.
Right.
And that is, I sometimes think, somebody like that, because as a reader, I can believe anything.
Right.
If the writer does the job.
Exactly.
So I always think that if somebody says that to me, their imagination was never honed. It was always left undeveloped.
Yeah, they don't want to go on the journey. They don't want to go on that imaginative journey. And that's sad. I mean, I feel very sad when people won't go down that path.
Well, thinking of going on the journey, the Will Wilder series almost didn't happen, but it ended up at Random House. Tell us about that.
It did. No, my journey to get this book published was almost as treacherous as Will's to get the relic back that he loses at one point in the book. Initially, this book was at another publisher, and due to disagreements, I bought the rights back, which is, as you know, something a writer almost never does, probably shouldn't do, and you only do when it's a dire situation, and in this case it was. But my agent at the time, Loretta Barrett of Happy Memory, said, I've never had a client do this in 35 years, but I think you're right to do it. Yeah, I think you need to do it. You need to save the series. So I bought it back, and then only a few months later, my agent died of a brain tumor. So I'm here with this book that I've worked 7 years on. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I approached some publishers with it. One was really interested, and a friend of mine said, let me take it to Random House. I said, Chip, my friend Chip Flaherty, I said, Chip, I've been publishing at Random House for 10 years. My editors there say, this type of middle-grade adventure fiction is just not what they're looking for. But if you want to take it to Random House, fine, have at it. But I'm already talking to some other folks. Well, he took it to Random House. I get a call a few days later from Barbara Marcus. Now, Barbara Marcus will probably mean very little to the viewing audience. She is the Wizard of Oz of children's literature. Barbara Marcus is the woman who not only acquired, but launched the Harry Potter series when she was at Scholastic. You know, the midnight signings, the rollout of the book, the whole thing. I mean, she brought Harry Potter to America. So she really has a very sharp eye, and she loved the series. She said, we want to publish this. Kids are going to love this adventure, and I love the concept of the series. Why did you want to acquire the Will Wilder series for Random House?
I think there are several reasons. The first is the first tenet. I thought children and boys and girls would really like to read it. It's a great read, it's a great romp, and that's really important because we want kids to read. I actually think it's going to fit in quite well to the marketplace because of the adventure aspect. And because it is really sort of a thrill-a-minute, great family, great adults. So in some ways it has sort of the cornerstone of every solid series. The other reason we wanted to publish is it's that interesting balance of adventure and history, and that to feed children real facts in a fun way is really a wonderful thing to do because they need that balance.
What do you want kids and all readers to take away from the Will Wilder series?
I want them to feel empowered, both from the reading experience and from what Will is willing to do, and that what even more his friends, who are clearly terrified, are willing to do for friendship. I want them to take away some learning. I learned a lot reading the book. I did not know the things you are talking about in the book before I read it, but really I want them to come away feeling satisfaction of a wonderful read. And I think that's what you have given them. And I think that when kids get to know Will, they will see themselves in Will, because he is not perfect. He is flawed, but he wants to do the right thing and has a wonderful sense of adventure.
I can truly say, in 10 years of publishing, I don't have anything near the Koontz track record, but I have never had a publisher and an editor, Phoebe Ye at Crown, my editor, Emily Easton. I've never had a group embrace a work like this and so champion it on all fronts. I mean, they have really brought their A game to it. I'm humbled that Barbara and the whole team, has so taken this under their wing. And it is, of course, the perfect home for Will. It's just the perfect spot for him.
Now, they'll do a great job.
Oh, well, but that's right. We're at the same publisher now.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that won't redound to your disfavor.
No, and it hasn't so far.
Why should boys and girls read this series?
For a number of reasons. I think, first of all, boys are going to relish this adventure. I mean, it's a romp. There's a lot of satirical fun around the edges. Will is a kind of, he's a wise guy. He's a kid who doesn't believe things at first sight. He's shrewd. He also has this ability, though, when he feels he has to do something, he throws everything at it. He abandons all reserve and kind of takes his friends with him, and they go on this fantastical adventure. Boys are going to love that supernatural ride. The girls are going to, I think, love the ride as well. They're also going to love the characters here. Aunt Lucille, the great Aunt Lucille, is she's a surprising character. I can't reveal everything about her, but girls are going to love her. She's a strong female lead. His friend Cammie, Will's friend Cammie Merriweather, is also, a really smart, sharp kid. I think kids are going to want to go on that journey, and there are so few places for them to go where they can take part in a series, have something to discuss with their friends, and it challenges them in one respect because they're encountering history. They're encountering history at every stop, and even unraveling some of the challenges requires a little understanding. So they learn along the way. One of the early readers said it reminds them of, National Treasure. It has kind of that chase quality about it, and you have to unravel the riddle to get to the next chamber. There is some of that here. And then there's the supernatural dimension that I thought important to put in the work. And so for all those reasons, I think kids are going to love this series. And the letters I've gotten, Dean, have been so gratifying and touching. I got a fifth grader wrote me, Braden wrote me, and he said in the letter, on every page, I felt like I was with Will. In fact, I felt like I was Will. And he said, and what I learned is that a 12-year-old can really change the world. And then he can do something else and restore everything back to normal. And I thought, this is why I write. This is exactly why I wanted to write for kids. It is touching them and reaching them. And if I got no other review or no other letter, that would suffice for me. I mean, it was just one of those great, beautiful letters.
One of the things I loved about this book was something that I now and then get criticized for. And they say, your children are always so smart. They're always so engaged. They're mature beyond their years. I don't think that's true.
No.
I've known many children like the ones I write about But I think I don't see it very often. Kids are, when adults are not writing for kids, or even sometimes when they are, they sort of write down. And
Right.
you didn't do that.
No,
in
no,
this.
no. Kids are very sharp, particularly today, Dean. I mean, I see it in my own kids. I mean, the nice thing is, I have my children and their friends became my test audience for the book. I would write a chapter and then read it to them. And let me tell you, they are brutal critics. That's boring. Why are you putting that in there? Take that out. That character's stupid. But I really like this one. And I'm like, you like that one? So, I went back and I rejiggered things. But it was amazing watching their reaction to certain moments of the book. And they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. So I thought, I'm going to write the children that I've encountered, my children and their friends, and they're really sharp. In fact, sometimes they're smarter than the adults I know because they're seeing deeper. They're seeing in a different way. And Will Wilder has that ability as well.
Yeah. Well, it really works. And
Thank you.
Now, families should read this together, I think.
Well, there's been a lot of letters I've gotten from families where the kids come to the parents and say, is this true? Is there a finger bone somewhere in a play? It encourages that kind of questioning. And the parents are going to get one story here, Dean. It's like reading a Dean Koontz book. You can take the ride. It's a great story. The plot points are fascinating. They're cliffhangers and turns. But if you're looking for something else, if you have the eyes for it, there's an entire other narrative here. So the parents, I think, are going to come away with one story. The children are going to take quite another. And I hope, my goal is, it's the type of book that I love and that I read as a child that you can mature with. And when you go back to it as an adult, you see things you never imagined and you totally missed on the first reading as a child. And that's what I want for the Will Wilder series, and I hope is in place.
What book or books in your childhood had that powerful effect on you, never to be forgotten?
Well, one of them, the two that always stick out. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I loved. And the other was Charlotte's Web.
Oh,
Those were the two kids' books that left the deepest mark on me. Charlie, because, he was a character. I didn't know poor people like Charlie. I mean, you really felt so bad for Charlie Bucket in the beginning of that book. And then, of course, he's the one chosen. I always tear up when I think about it. He's the one chosen, of all the kids. And they've got the wealthy kid and they've got the other kid. And it's simple, humble Charlie Bucket who's the one plucked up and brought into Willy Wonka's world. And then, of course, he's given the key to the kingdom at the end because he was the only one who was true. And that book it's magic to me. I've always loved that book. And of course, Charlotte's Web, because it's beautifully written.
Yeah.
And the lesson there about every life having such worth, even animal life. Every life is used is necessary. Every life is necessary for an important end. And it all ties together. And I love that.
I read Charlotte's Web as an adult.
Really?
And was moved to tears
Yeah.
when the little pig and all of Charlotte's babies start hatching, and they're all floating away, and he's not going to have any more of Charlotte.
No.
But then, of course, he does. Because,
Yeah.
And I thought that was just a piece of genius to do that.
I know. E.B. White said he came upon that. He was walking into the farm, and again, this is the eyes that I hope people reading not only my series but your work, any work of fiction that is truly engaging, that it gives us the eyes to appreciate the wonder of the world again. My friend Richard John Newhouse used to always say, the world is far more wonderful and filled with miracles than we ever imagined. And that's what I hope my work is filled with. E.B. White walked into his farm in upstate New York one day. He was cleaning out the slop for the pig that they were going to kill. And he looked up into the corner, and there was this little pod up there hanging. And it was a spider's pod filled with little eggs. And he was fascinated by it. And he would check on it every day. That's where the whole story came from. But it was his eyes seeing the miracles all around us, that this little cottony patch hanging from the corner of his farm would create thousands of little spiders that would then go on and spread spider webs and continue life all over his farm. The recognition of that little thing, created this timeless story that has touched generations. And who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Yeah. It's, you once asked me in an interview how getting a dog affected my life.
Right.
That was the key thing. I'd gotten to a point in my life that I didn't look as closely at the mundane things. And when you walk a dog, the dog wants to smell this, wants to look at that. And the dog takes its own pace, and it opened me up again to all of that.
Wow.
And I always say in interviews that the one thing I want people to walk away from anything I write is a sense of how incredibly full of wonder and mystery the world is. Because that is, if you can recognize that, and it's the thing that people blind themselves to.
I agree.
Because it's scary.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's a burden with seeing things as they are, but there's such wonder and beauty that we're missing, and our children are missing. And I hate when kids are sitting around a table, and this is the kid.
Yes.
You got 4 kids and a parent. We were at dinner last night. They're cutting themselves off from precious time with mom and dad, moments of engagement and an understanding of the world that they will miss, they'll never get. This book, I really wrote it so that those generations could reconnect and we could excite kids again about the wonder, the mystery of ourselves, of our history, and of the world around us.
Yeah. Well, you've done a job.
I'm trying.
George Martin, who is very successful at the moment, says there are 2 types of writers.
Yeah.
There are architects and gardeners. Do you agree with that, or not? Which one are you?
I kind of agree with it. I know Dean Koontz is a gardener, but I'm an architect, I think. You know what it is with a series this large? I don't know how you did the Odd Thomas series of 8 books and kept track of all those characters without outlining to some degree. I still don't understand.
I never outline.
Never outline. You just keep it all in your head. Character ticks, taglines, all of that. You have a much better, you know what it is? Your mind is better than mine. I have binders. I have character binders. I have a schematic of broken down by chapter, and then there's a column for each character. And I make notes in that just to keep myself straight because it's so overwhelming, I would lose my way. Now, I'm not a slave to that outline. The outline is just a guide. Many times, as you said, the story starts turning on you. Will tells me something else, and I've had to just throw away part of an outline. But it gives me the confidence to dive in. I don't think I could have started this series without outlining the first book extensively, and all the subsequent books, I did the same.
I started out writing outlines for the first dozen or more books, but eventually gave them up. And by the way, I bought back 20 different books of mine.
You did?
Yes, I'll tell you about that.
Okay, later. Another episode. Don't miss that one.
If you could write anything else, what would it be?
Harlequin romances, I think. No, no. I would write bodice rippers. No, I would write a mystery series. I've always wanted to write a mystery series, and I have one rattling around in the back of my head. I've got a great protagonist, but with Will, I don't have time to, to bring that protagonist quite to life. But I will eventually. It's a good story. I love the characters, but I've loved mysteries since I was a kid. I read all the Agatha Christie books. I read Rex Stout, the Nero Wolfe. Yes. What a great! He's another one that I'd want to invite to dinner. Yeah. Rex Stout. Just the form of that. And to propel a character through time, 40 books, 50 books with the same character, Rex Stout, Agatha Christie, James Lee Burke, a beautiful writer, oh my gosh. Again, who captures, they capture that world, and you want to go back, but to keep it fresh for so long.
Very difficult.
That's a very difficult challenge.
Very difficult. One of my great pleasures in life was being asked to write an introduction to a new edition of a Rex Stout book. Wow. And I felt very honored and sort of like, I better not mess this up.
No, don't mess that one up. Are those great books or what?
They are.
I love Nero Wolfe.
I read every one of them.
Archie Goodwin.
What 3 books for the middle grade readers would you recommend they read?
Books that I would recommend. I love Wonder, which is a fairly recent book. By Placido. That's a wonderful book. And it's about a boy with deformity that teaches everyone around him something. And I love that book. There's Charlotte's Web, of course. Peter Pan I love. Peter Pan is probably one of the most beautifully written books. That's one I weep every time I read it to the kids. They can almost predict it. In fact, my oldest will go, uh-oh, Daddy's about to cry. Here it comes. And sure, I turn the page, and then they went back to Neverland. She was too old to fly. I always, that breaks me up. I don't know what, I think I know what that is. Sometime I'll tell you. There's a family story connected to it that I think it triggers that emotion. But I've always loved the wonder of Peter Pan. It's an adventure. It's really about growing older and life, and when it's time to leave the things of childhood, which I haven't quite passed yet. I'm not there.
I was wondering, when is that?
No, that's not going to come. When they put me in the ground.
Best advice to parents to get their kids to read more?
Oh, this is one of the goals of Storyinted. It not only features interviews with best-selling authors and influential authors, but we really want to inspire a lifelong love of reading in kids. There are two great things. First of all, I think every parent should take their kids to a bookstore, every parent, or a library, and let them free roam. Let them find the things that interest them and then talk to them about it, figure out why, and then help guide them to those books in that area, things they might like, things that will challenge them a little bit. The other thing that inspired my love of learning, I'll tell a little tale. Up until 5th grade, Dean, I really was not much of a reader. I read comic books, I read comedy books, I read little things. I didn't really read novels, books, short stories, but not books. I had a 5th grade teacher in New Orleans, Brother Rayfield, and he did a marvelous thing for me. And this would be my bit of advice for parents, teachers, anybody. He picked up an Ellery Queen novel. Ellery Queen were two writers who famously wrote multiple books, and Ellery Queen was the detective in it, but Brother Rayfield did something so marvelous. He read the book, maybe 2 chapters, so the murder happened, and there were all kind of red herrings, and then he said, and Ellery Queen walked onto the scene. He closed the book, he put it at the end of his table, and he said, "Gentlemen, if you'd like to know how the story ends, the book is here." And we're all like, it's like getting to the end of, a movie, and they suddenly kill the projector. So naturally, we all, elbowing and popping each other to get to the book. And that was what really started my love of reading and launched everything, everything from there on. I can trace it back to that moment because I would never have gotten into the theater. I would never have loved reading or writing or had the respect for it that made me want to eventually do it, had it not been for that one act. So I hope people use that.
Attendant to that, one thing that parents should never do
Yes.
is say, you can't read mysteries because they're trash. You
Right.
can't read science fiction or horror or whatever because it's trash. I heard that as a child so much.
Really?
And that usually comes from people who've never read any of those genres.
You're right.
And of course, there's trash in anything.
Right.
But there's also fine work in anything.
You are right.
And so just trust the child that is developing
They'll
a taste.
find their way. They'll find their way. Look, we had a teacher, one of my sons had a teacher. I don't think I'm telling too big a tale. They won't kill me. And the teacher told him, "What are you reading?" And he said, "Well, I'm reading the Kingdom Keepers series." I said, "Oh, why are you reading that? What are you reading that for? You should be reading Tolkien." Well, wait a minute. He can read both. He can read, and we encourage him. I told the teacher, "Look, I encourage him to read everything, not just one thing." And I worry at times if you force a great work upon a child not ready for it, they will never go back to it. People make this mistake with Shakespeare. Now, I love Shakespeare. I hear Shakespeare every day. I mean, as an actor, it was always in my mouth and my ears. When I'm driving, I have great, highlights of Shakespeare, Olivier and Gielgud. I put it on in the car. I love hearing that. However, it's not for everybody. And I think if you don't immerse people in it at the right moment, when they're ready for it, you'll lose them forever. They'll never go back to it.
There was a lot when I was growing up as a kid of pushing Shakespeare into you in junior high. I've often said probably the most hated novel of my generation was Silas Marner because we were forced to read it, and it was no interest whatsoever to kids our age.
No.
So that, I don't think I could ever go back and read Silas Marner, and I'm sure it's...
Yeah, it's a perfectly good book, but,
Yeah.
but it turns you off to it. And that's why I wanted to capture kids. In writing the Will Wilder series, I spent a lot of time studying where these kids are, what they're looking for. And then how do you meet them halfway? How do we give them an adventure, something that's nourishing, thought-provoking, challenging, but takes them on a real ride, one they want to go on? And I hope a lot of reluctant readers will find it. And it seems that's happening. My thanks to Dean for such a great conversation. Dean Koontz's latest novel of suspense, Ashley Bell, is available at bookstores everywhere. And I want to remind you that book 2 of my Will Wilder series, Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders, is on its way. We just unveiled the cover. It will be available in bookstores March 7th of 2017. You can pre-order it now at Amazon, EWTNRC.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever books are sold. And thanks to all of you who've read Will Wilder's first adventure. And if you haven't, well, now you can catch up.